Hello and welcome back to the Idiot Rambles podcast, the podcast where I, an idiot, ramble about a random topic. Recently, Lara Croft has made her way into Dead by Daylight, which has sparked an interesting debate on who should be added to the game. And as someone who has spent way too much time playing the game, I felt like it would be an interesting topic to talk about this week. The main discourse is who deserves to be in Dead by Daylight, as many people point out that Lara Croft from Tomb Raider, obviously. Tomb Raider is not a horror franchise or horror series. There are horror elements to it, but it's not a horror franchise itself, which has led to some people saying she shouldn't be in Dead by Daylight. And a similar debate occurred with D&D getting added to the game. As far as my personal thoughts on it, I think there are two types of Dead by Daylight players. The kind that say that Dead by Daylight's a horror game, and the kind that say it's a hide-and-seek game. I like to view it more as a horror game, but over time it's more just a hide-and-seek game. And don't get me wrong, I'm a fan of Lara Croft. I like Tomb Raider. But I don't think she should be in the game yet, at the very least. I don't think there's necessarily a problem with adding some of these non-horror franchises that have horror part of them. But there are other licenses which I believe should have top priority over them that are actually horror. I think a good example is The Walking Dead. I haven't seen The Walking Dead. My knowledge of the series extends to playing episode 1 of the Telltale game and owning the skins in Fortnite. But from what I've heard, obviously very well liked, and people really want it in Dead by Daylight, specifically Rick Grimes as a survivor. I feel characters like him, these characters that are more based in horror, should have top priority over Lara Croft and D&D, which thinks that, sure, they have horror elements in them, but they're not necessarily horror things themselves. And especially within this year alone, both the Friday the 13th license and the Five Nights at Freddy's license have both been more open to collaborating with other games. So to see these franchises, getting more and more collaborations with other games, but then meanwhile in Dead by Daylight, we're just getting a survivor who isn't really a horror character. It's disappointing, for sure. And we're getting Castlevania in August, or September, whenever it is. We're getting Castlevania soon, which I feel that's a fair one to get added to the game. But it's hard to not be at least a little bit disappointed that we're not going to be getting Friday the 13th or FNAF, arguably the two most requested licenses in the game. We're not getting those until at least March. And it's a little bit disappointing. FNAF is personally my most requested license to get added to the game, besides Psycho. And I don't know, I'm not saying, obviously I like Lara Croft's perks and stuff. I like the D&D stuff. But I just wish we had something more horror based. I think Dead by Daylight is at its best when it is a horror game with Myers and Ghostface, and I'd even say Dredge. These are very much characters that when you go against them, it feels like you're actually playing a horror game versus going against, say, like Deathslinger or I don't know, Twins or Skull Merchant. That's a really good example. Going against like Skull Merchant, where it doesn't feel like you're playing against a horror killer, you're in a horror game. It feels more like you're playing just hide and seek with some actiony characters. And this debate has been a thing in the past before. I know with Resident Evil, when that released, some people said Resident Evil is more action than it is horror. But I think in the case of Resident Evil, again, at its best, is when it's a horror thing. Resident Evil 2, specifically the remake, is a horror game more than anything else. And I feel that's more of the legacy, more of the positive legacy of Resident Evil than the action side of it. So I think, yeah, Resident Evil deserved to be in the game. But with Lara Croft, it's different. Tomb Raider is an action puzzle platformer. It's not a horror. Like, if you took all the genres that Tomb Raider is at its core, horror wouldn't be a part of it. It's the same reason why I think Terminator shouldn't be in Dead by Daylight. I know a lot of people like Terminator, but I don't see Terminator as a horror character. Sure, like the first movie has horror elements to it, but it's still not a horror movie itself. The Terminator isn't a horror franchise. It's a thriller, maybe, action for sure, but it's not horror. And again, getting these kind of more thriller actiony licenses in the game isn't necessarily a bad thing until you compare it to some of the more horror stuff we could actually be getting instead, but rather all we're getting is more actiony stuff. I know for me personally, like I said, my two most requested licenses are FNAF and Psycho, both of which I think are horror. I know that's obviously a lot of discourse with FNAF, but with Springtrap and specifically FNAF 3, that's horror. That's a horror game. Springtrap is a horror character. Psycho is definitely a horror movie. And I feel like a lot of people as well, when they're dreaming up their franchises they want in the game, it's usually horror. I don't know anyone who is dying for Lara Croft or D&D to be added to Dead by Daylight. Sure, people who like those franchises were happy to see them in Dead by Daylight, but I don't think it was a specific request. It's like the same way as I view, like, Breaking Bad getting added into Fortnite. Like, sure, I love Breaking Bad, and if it was added, I would love it and I'd buy it, but it's not necessarily something I'm super keen on requesting, because it's just not realistic to expect it. But overall, I don't know. I just wish Dead by Daylight more leaned into horror. I mean, we just had The Unknown, who, design-wise and story-wise, is a horrifying killer. But then you look at the power of Unknown, it's just, you have this amazing design, amazing story for a killer, but then for their power, it's just pink orb. Like, I don't know. The last, like, actual scary killer I felt like we had within Dead by Daylight, I mean, I don't even know. With the lights out mode, that brought horror back into the game. And if they added that as a permanent mode and focused more on adding horror-like killers, both licensed and unlicensed, I think Dead by Daylight would I would certainly be more receptive to it. Because, again, every single time they've added, when they added Skull Merchant, when they added D&D, adding Lara Croft, all of those times are probably the times I played the game the least, because I didn't care, because it just wasn't, it's not what I want from Dead by Daylight. I want horror, not thriller or action. I think that's about it. Just overall, add more horror to DBD. Sure, you could add more action-y franchises, but prioritize actual horror. Now it's on to review of the week. Alright, for this week, I watched 3 movies this week, one of them being a rewatch, all of them being in theaters. I rewatched The Lion King, I watched Fly Me to the Moon, and I watched Princess Mononoke. 2 of which were amazing movies, and the other one sure did exist. I'm gonna talk about... I'll talk about Princess Mononoke. I've seen like 4 or 5 other Studio Ghibli movies, and all of them were G-rated, so I was like, oh, that's what Studio Ghibli does. You know, they do wholesome, little chill movies. So when I tell you the shock I had when a man got decapitated in Princess Mononoke, it completely caught me off guard. I loved the movie. I went in not really expecting anything. I rewatched it for Ghibli Fest, and that was one of the few that our theater was actually playing, because our theater wasn't really wanting to play any of the other ones besides Spirited Away. And I didn't even have expectations. I was like, I'll just go ahead and watch it, because it's a Studio Ghibli movie in theaters, so I might as well go check it out. And I loved it so much. What really surprised me is just how much influence this movie had with Breath of the Wild. Like, the entire time watching the movie, I was like, oh yeah, Breath of the Wild definitely was influenced by this part. Even at the very end of the movie, the outfit that the main character wears is incredibly reminiscent of Link's outfit in Breath of the Wild. And considering Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite games of all time, this obviously worked for me with Princess Mononoke. It showed me that Studio Ghibli is good at doing more than just movies like Ponyo and Totoro, which I love those movies, but they are just more chill kind of vibe movies. This showed me that Studio Ghibli can do more than just those, that they can do these grand adventure movies. I mean, Princess Mononoke was so good, it made me turn on my Switch for the first time in 2 months, and made me boot up Tears of the Kingdom for the first time in 9 months, just because of how good it was, and how much I wanted to live through that world. I would say, watch Princess Mononoke. It's absolutely... If you're someone who kind of avoids Studio Ghibli movies, because you don't want to watch just a laid-back movie, watch Princess Mononoke. It's exactly what you want from a fantasy action movie. And with the animation of Studio Ghibli, it just enhances it even more. And with that, it is now time for the question of the week. Hello and welcome to the Question of the Week section of the podcast. The section of the podcast where I bring in a guest and ask them a really dumb question. This week, as our first returning guest, we have Colin.
Hello, it's great to be back.
Yeah, last time Colin was on here, he was in a bit of a rush since he had to go to work. So this time around, we're recording this at 8:30 at night. He's not at work. And I think I've got a much better topic this time around. So you bet ready, Colin?
Yeah. Let's hear it.
Okay. So, one night, you're driving home to your cabin in the woods. You just finished
of course.
you just finished your 9-to-5 job at the big corporate association. And
Okay.
you get to your wooden log cabin, and you notice the door is slightly ajar. You go, that's weird. So, you go through the door.
Hey dude, what the flip?
And you hear a loud banging noise going on in one of the rooms. Just going bang, bang, bang. You walk into the room, and what you see is your wife banging her head on the wall to the point where her head is half cracked open. And once you walk, your wife of 20 years, once you walk in there, She looks at you, bangs her head against the wall again, and then slowly falls to the ground. As she does this, you see a white, ghastly figure appear at the other corner of the room. You look at it with inquisitive eyes, getting closer, until you realize this figure has no true form, no true shape. It is truly just something of the unknown. So you run out of the room, going to your shed to try to find an axe. The ghastly figure falling behind you. You swing an axe at the figure. It goes right through it. And as you do this, the figure goes straight through you into your body, and you feel an unimaginable amount of pain as this figure takes over your body, controlling every one of your actions. You only being able to witness it, stare through it, unable to have any control. And slowly, this figure takes control of your entire life. It ruins every relationship you've had, ruins all the good things in your life, all of which, while all you can do is stare and watch, feeling an unimaginable pain throughout this entire experience as your body tries to do everything it can to fight back, but to no avail. Until eventually, after years of this, the figure leaves your body and nothing is left of you. You've lost all of your sanity. And what you do, you go to the same log cabin, and then you bang your head against the wall, the same as she did. So the question is, was that figure, was that a ghost or was that a phantom?
Um, well, you see, a ghost wouldn't do that, so I'm gonna have to say a phantom.
That's actually
'Cause
correct.
like,
Yeah, it is a
yeah, no,
phantom.
'cause like I've seen like ghost videos and all that don't really possess you and all that.
Yeah, I know how much you love watching J Station, so,
I
this,
don't watch that. No,
uh,
no, no, no. I don't watch that. No.
he's your favorite content creator.
No, no, he's
You
not.
loved
I
what he
swear.
did to his ex-girlfriend.
No.
So yeah,
What did he do to his ex-girlfriend?
oh, you love it. So, anyway,
I don't. I don't.
thanks for being a guest. Thanks for coming back and being a guest on here for answering the question, actually getting it correct.
Okay.
And that's about it for
Okay.
this episode. So, okay, bye.